A top Iranian nuclear scientist was assassinated. What message is being sent, and who is sending it? And more importantly, how did we get here? To answer that, I'll be taking a journey through a promised land, Barack Obama's latest memoir, to illuminate the distorted anti-Zionist thinking that ultimately paved the way for a new Middle East. Clearly, the Middle East is changing dramatically. Unbelievable developments have been taking place during the administration of our president. Who would have believed that after decades of no peace agreements, everyone talking about peace, but no agreements being made for, I think, over 25 years, since Jordan, since Egypt made peace with Israel, and now you have literally country after country making a warm peace with Israel. United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, country after country lining up to be friends with Israel. And the most recent development, amazing, the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, traveling directly to Saudi Arabia to meet with the prince, to meet with the defense minister, to initiate a relationship with the most important country in the Middle East, possibly a critical state, Saudi Arabia. Who would have ever believed that this was possible? And these are amazing developments that are happening. The Middle East is changing forever. And then we have James Bond back in action. And guess where James Bond is? He's in Tehran. The assassination of Iran's top nuclear scientist. Let us just remember, Iran is not just another country. Iran is a country that is spreading terrorism throughout the Middle East. Let us remember that Tehran is responsible for the deaths of hundreds and hundreds of Americans involved in violence and terrorism throughout the Middle East. Let us remember that the Ayatollahs in Tehran openly talk about the great Satan being America and the little Satan being the state of Israel. Let us take seriously when the leaders of Iran speak about wiping Israel off the map. Let us take seriously the fact that Iran cannot be trusted. Is there any doubt in our minds that Iran will develop a nuclear weapon, that is its goal? And the civilized world needs to do whatever is necessary to stop that from ever happening. Iran can never have nuclear weapons. So getting rid of this, called the father of nuclear development in Iran, removing him from the face of the world, is a very good thing, in spite of former members of the Obama administration thinking it's a terrible thing. It is a great moment for the world to get rid of those who talk about annihilating another nation, about annihilating the Jewish people, about murdering 8 million people in the state of Israel, because we need to take that seriously. And the big question really is, as the Biden administration enters office after January 20th, is will the Biden administration, will Biden recognize that the Middle East landscape has changed? Or will it be the third term of the Obama administration? Will it just be a continuation of the same kind of reasoning and the, closing your eyes to the realities of the Middle East? We hope not. And here's the new book by Barack Obama, A Promised Land. Unfortunately, filled with distortions, literally inaccurate information, inaccurate facts. And we need to look at some of the things that former President Obama speaks about in his book. And we need to look at the distortions. we need to look at the outright misinformation. You know, everyone is entitled to have their opinion. Barack Obama is entitled to have his opinion on all issues of the Middle East or anything else, but he's not entitled to his own facts. One of the statements made by Obama, he says that the British had occupied Palestine at the time of the Balfour Declaration. First, let me explain that the Balfour Declaration was a document issued by the British government, by the way, in 1917. President Obama, 1917. In 1917, the Turks controlled Palestine, not the British. Again, let me repeat that. In 1917, when the Balfour Declaration was issued by the British government, recognizing that Britain is going to work towards a Jewish homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine, that happened in 1917. So this is just not misinformation. This is just an absolute, incorrect information. It's wrong history and needs to be corrected. Let me also explain something important. The word Palestine, Palestinians, Palestine, where did that come from? Who are the Palestinians? The land of Israel, Judea, where the Jewish people are connected to for thousands and thousands of years. The name Palestine only came when the Roman Empire defeated the Jewish people in Israel, in the land of Judea, forced the Jews into exile, slaughtered millions of Jews at that particular time, and they wanted to make sure that the Jews would forget their connection to their Jewish homeland, and they changed the name to Palestina, to Palestine. The original Palestinians are Jews living in the land of Israel, and they've been living there forever and ever and ever. There was always a Jewish presence in the land of Israel, changed to Palestine. So let us remember the original inhabitants of this land, where the Jewish people are connected to forever, are the Jewish people. And then Obama says over the next 20 years, Zionist leaders mobilized a surge of Jewish migration to Palestine over the next 20 years. The fact is that between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, over 100,000 Jews came to Palestine. Palestine was a land that was basically empty. There was nothing happening. Nobody was interested in this land of Palestine except the Jewish people returning at the end of the 19th and 20th century. And as I said, Jews were always living in that area. And the reason Jews began to return to their original home was because of pogroms, because Jews were being massacred. And also, by the way, because the United States, which welcomed refugees in the 19th century, at a certain point at the end of the 19th century and 20th century, stopped immigration. They didn't want people from Eastern Europe flooding the United States. So more Jews began their journey to Palestine. The connection of the Jewish people to Palestine, the dream of returning, the prayers that we pray 3 times a day, the connection of the Jewish people has always been there. And the president is either not aware of it, not interested, and is distorting history. He is distorting history. And then regarding the partition plan in 1947. In 1947, there was conflict in Palestine between Jews and Arabs. And the United Nations at that time, representing the countries of the world, Obama says in his book, Zionist leaders accepted a partition, but Arab Palestinians, as well as surrounding Arab nations that were just emerging from colonial rule, strenuously objected. The president doesn't really deal. First of all, why does he call them Zionist leaders? They were Jewish leaders. What's his problem? Obama, Jewish leaders, not Zionist leaders. They were Jews who understood the need for the Jewish people, especially after the Holocaust. When Jews had nowhere to go, nobody was interested in Jews. Nobody cared about Jews. The only place in the world where Jews could go, especially after World War II, was to Palestine. And even then they had difficulty because of the British control. So when the United Nations said, we're going to solve this problem, this conflict that exists between two different people who both claim the same land, they decided there was going to be, guess what? That's funny, a two-state solution, which everyone talks about. On May 14, 1948, Israel declares statehood. What does Obama say about that declaration? And I quote, "As Britain withdrew, the two sides quickly fell into a war. And with Jewish militias claiming victory in 1948, the state of Israel was officially born." What a distorted version of what happened in 1948. Militias? What in God's name is Obama talking about? What militias is he talking about? It was the Israeli Defense Forces. It was individuals who just got off the boat straight out of concentration camps who were put in the front lines to fight the 5 Arab nations that attacked Israel, determined to destroy the Jewish state in 1948. And when I say destroy, I mean, is there any doubt in anyone's mind that if those 5 nations would have been successful, that every single Jew, the 600,000 Jews living in Israel that had just been declared, that they would have been brutalized, murdered? It would have been no different than the Nazis during the Holocaust. Any doubt about that? What does the president mean they fell into war? It was Israel that wanted peace. It was Israel that accepted the partition plan of the nations of the world through the United Nations. And Israel that was recognized by the U.S., by the Soviet Union, and many other countries. Obama even claimed that for the next 3 decades, Israel, this is what he says, Israel would engage in a succession of conflicts with its Arab neighbors. Like Israel had nothing else to do. You know, in 1948, as Israel is absorbing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews from throughout Arab countries, Jews living in all the nations of the Middle East, some of them for 1,000 years, were forced out of their homes, and Israel absorbed during a short period of time almost 850,000 Jews, refugees from Arab nations who came to the state of Israel. What is the president talking about? There hasn't been a moment in Israel's history since 1948 that the threat of terrorism and acts of terrorism have not been a reality almost every single day, directed against the civilian population of the state of Israel. There's never been a moment of absolute peace and quiet. There's always someone who wants to kill a Jew. Since 1948, there's been no change. And we have the Sinai campaign in 1956 again. It's all about Israel defending itself. Israel wants peace. Israel wants to live in tranquility. Israel wants to get along with its neighbors, but its neighbors have no such interest. And how well I remember the war breaking out, the 6-day war. Nobody knew it was going to be a 6-day war. I remember the weeks and weeks prior to the outbreak of the war. I remember how terrified Jews were throughout the world. that Israel was in danger. I was 17 years old. I remember watching the videos on television of Egyptian soldiers marching through the streets of Cairo by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, pledging and committing themselves to pushing the Jews into the sea, to destroying the Jewish state. How I remember the Israelis begging and pleading with the Jordanians not to enter the conflict along with the Syrians and the Egyptians, who were waiting for the moment, who were mobilizing. Israel came to a standstill. Nobody was working. The military was mobilized. And the Israeli army, Israeli defense forces, consists of civilians throughout the country. We were terrified. We were terrified that Israel would not exist, that all these Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and neighboring countries that sent soldiers, that sent tanks and other weapons for one single purpose, to destroy the Jewish state. That's what it was all about. Prior to 67, it wasn't about Judea and Samaria. It wasn't about the West Bank. It wasn't about Israel making concessions. It wasn't about settlements. It wasn't about settlers. It was Israel being attacked for the purpose of destroying the Jewish state. So what in God's name is Obama talking about? Like Israel sitting back and just looking for opportunities for conflict. Pretty outrageous. And boy, do I remember when the war was over. And we Jews need to apologize for being successful. The world loves us a lot more when Jews die. When Jewish blood is spills, we get a lot of rahmanas, a lot of pity from all over the world when Jews are dying. We get editorials, even in the New York Times, when Jews die, when Jewish blood is spilled. But when Jews defend themselves and are successful, very successful, we've committed a crime. We've done something terrible, in spite of the fact that in the 6-day war, you had the entire Arab world determined to push the Jews into the sea, to destroy the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And when the war was over, and the Jews were successful in Sinai, the West Bank, the possibility of Jews being able to visit the Holy Temple Wall, the Western Wall. Does anybody remember that for 19 years, when the Jordanians occupied the West Bank, let us remember that, when the Jordanians occupied the West Bank for 19 years, hardly any country in the world recognized Jordan's right to occupy the West Bank. They did it. They controlled it. Nobody got too excited about it. And Jews could not go to their holiest site in the world. And I do not remember anyone getting too excited about it. The Jews could not visit the Western Wall, the wall remaining from the Holy Temple. And I remember so well, Israel liberated all of this land, and the government of Israel was prepared to give it all up, ready to make all kinds of concessions. And I remember, as if it was yesterday, the meeting of Arab nations, the Arab League that met in Khartoum. And what was the message, President Obama? Do you remember? Because you didn't mention it in the book. You forgot to mention it in the book. It's not in the book. You forgot about the 3 no's from the Arab world to the people of Israel who were prepared to hand it all back. The Arabs were the aggressors, determined to destroy the Jewish state. But Israel wanted to make peace more than anything else in the world. And the 3 no's of Khartoum were the following, Mr. President: no peace, no recognition, no negotiation. That was the official position of the Arab world, Mr. President. You forgot to mention that, right? I'm sure it was an accident. I'm happy to inform you. And then the president says something else that is just factually not correct. I don't know who did the fact-checking on this book. I don't know. Maybe it was Michelle. Maybe it was his two daughters. I don't know. But it surely was not a Middle Eastern historian, because this is not an opinion. This is factual. Obama claims that the rise of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, was a result of the Six-Day War. Now, what does that mean? That the PLO came into existence after 1967. Barak, the PLO was established in 1964. In fact, Yasser Arafat himself tried to blow up Israel's national water carrier in 1965. 1965. Before there were settlements, before there were settlers. So how do you get this wrong, Mr. President? How are you so off with basic facts? And then there was the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Look, there was a war of attrition against the Jewish people. The constant acts of terrorism. Can we as Americans understand what it is like to get on a bus and the possibility of that bus blowing up because someone is not happy with the Jewish people and the Jewish state, so you can murder men, women, and children? Or going to your local pizza store in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or anywhere else in the country and someone blows up the pizza store. Or someone plants a bomb, in a supermarket. The countless acts of terror, literally from 1948. I challenge anyone to find one day, a 2-day period, where there's not an attempt to murder a Jew in the state of Israel. That is the facts. The fact, Mr. President, that you don't talk about. That the people of Israel want peace, are interested in peace, have proven again and again that they are willing to make incredible concessions for peace. The failure of Camp David, the year 2000. Who killed the deal, Mr. President? Who's responsible for the deal of the century never happening when Yasser Arafat, President Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel? I remember those days. I remember the concessions that the Prime Minister of Israel was prepared to make for peace. They were insane concessions. They would have jeopardized the state of Israel. I shock you, I know, when I tell you that Ehud Barak, the most decorated soldier in the state of Israel, and the Prime Minister in 2000, is prepared to give up 97% of Judea and Samaria for the sake of peace. Is that insane? Is that nuts? Is that crazy? And Yasser Arafat, back and forth, the discussions at Camp David with our president. Who said no? Who turned his back on peace? Who left Camp David and continued the acts of terrorism directed against the civilian population? I remember the polls that were taken in Israel, where 75% of the people of Israel said we're ready to make unbelievable concessions for peace, for real peace, if there's a real partner for peace, someone we can trust, someone who's willing to change their ways and go on a different path. And how can we forget? And of course, Ehud Barak, and by the way, that wasn't it. It wasn't just Camp David. I remember that after Camp David, Ehud Barak was so desperate to make peace with the Palestinians because there was an election in Israel and he wanted to accomplish something. I remember him meeting with Arafat in the Middle East with additional concessions. But who has always said no? And this is not my opinion. Bill Clinton made it very, very clear that the person who walked away from the deal of the century was none other than Yasser Arafat. And then a couple of years later, again, President Obama forgot to mention this. I mean, I don't know why he forgot, because the first volume of his work, of his biography, what is it, about 750 pages? 750 pages. There's going to be another 750 pages. But he couldn't fit some of these fundamental basic facts that present a completely different picture. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Yes, there are good guys and there are bad guys. The good guys are not necessarily perfect. The bad guys are not necessarily totally evil all the time. But there are good guys and the bad guys. There are people who have shown again and again that they are willing to risk everything for the sake of peace, and that is the people of Israel. And in 2003, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, negotiating this time with Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinians, was ready to go even further. How much further could you go than 97% of Ehud Barak? In his negotiations with Mahmoud Abbas, the deal was on the table. It was there for Mahmoud Abbas. Again, insanity on the part of the Prime Minister of Israel. But for the sake of peace, was prepared to give up literally almost everything. And guess what? This is really sick. This is really incredible. Was willing to give up Jerusalem to an international body. What prime minister, what Jew would give up Jerusalem, control of Jerusalem, to an international body? Can you imagine that? If he had been successful, if you wanted to visit the Holy Wall, the Western Wall, you would have had Palestinian and God knows what kind of soldiers in the streets of the old city of Jerusalem. How safe would you have felt? But Ehud Olmert was prepared to do this. And Ehud Olmert says clearly, Mahmoud Abbas walked away from this deal. Does Obama not know this? Is he not aware of this? But Obama has his own version of the people of Israel and the threats that Israel faces constantly. Obama charges in his book, says the following. I mean, this is amazing. He charges that Israel was, quote, leveling entire neighborhoods in Gaza. Israel just went out there and they just destroyed entire cities in Gaza. First, let us remember who's in charge of Gaza. The terrorist organization Hamas, an organization that openly talks about destroying the state of Israel. That is its goal. It doesn't want peace. It's honest. It's straightforward. We don't want peace. We want to liberate every single inch of the state of Israel. And Israel defending itself against missiles. You know, part of the problem in terms of the attacks upon the state of Israel coming from Gaza is not enough Jews are murdered by these missiles. I'm sorry. You know, if hundreds of Jews would be murdered, men, women, and children, you know, maybe we'd get more sympathy. Maybe we would get more understanding from the likes of Barack Obama. But, you know, we have those missiles that shoot down the bad missiles. We've had miracle after miracle of thousands and thousands of rockets being sent into Israel. Each one of those rockets is meant to murder innocent men, women, and children. And Barack Obama, in his book, a book that will be read by people all over the world, a book that will influence the minds of so many people, talks about Israel as if Israel has nothing else to do. They just want to destroy, leveling entire neighborhoods in Gaza. What a disgrace on the part of Barack Obama. He should be ashamed of himself. He knows that that is not the intention of the people of Israel. The people of Israel, the government of Israel is doing one single thing. The Prime Minister of Israel, whether it's Netanyahu that we know Barack Obama does not like, it doesn't matter. Let us remember that the Prime Minister of Israel is elected by the people of Israel. The only democracy in the Middle East, Barack Obama, elected by the people of Israel, the Prime Minister, Netanyahu. Sorry that your person was not elected, the one you preferred in election after election in the Middle East. But Israel is a democracy, and for you to distort that Israel's aim is to defend its citizens, the responsibility of a leader of any country, most important, is to defend its people. What country in the world would tolerate missiles being sent into its civilian population from a neighboring country? Every other country in the world would act with such severity we cannot even imagine. It's unbelievable that Barack Obama doesn't want to face the truth. And Barack Obama talks about he doesn't like AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the organization, a lobbying organization. America is made up of lobbying organizations. Organizations that lobby, whether it's for labor, whether it's for gay rights, whether it is for whatever issue. This is what America is all about. Every lobbying organization wants to be successful in its purpose. For the President of the United States to accuse AIPAC, literally accusing them of interfering with the policies of the United States, that American public officials, this is what Barack Obama says. He says that American public officials are afraid to do the right thing because they're afraid of AIPAC. How disrespectful is that to members of the United States Congress? He is saying that members of Congress are afraid to do the right thing because they're afraid of AIPAC. That is a horror. And I'm sorry to say, with all due respect to the former president, he should be ashamed of this kind of blood libel. It is no different from the kind of things that are being said by other members of the Democratic Party, like Omer and Tlaib. Didn't they say something very, very similar? It's unbelievable. And then you got to hear this. Let me just go back and I got to read this to you. Bear with me because it is really important. The president says that his interest was to enhance U.S.-Israeli cooperation across the board. And then he says, nevertheless, the noise orchestrated by Netanyahu had the intended effect of gobbling up our time. I know Netanyahu has nothing else to do but to make noise, right? He has nothing else to do. He's not busy, so he's making noise. What kind of noise? Just noise. That's all. And the president continues, gobbling up our time, putting us on the defensive, and reminding me that normal policy difference with an Israeli prime minister, even one who presided over a fragile coalition government, exacted a political cost that didn't exist. You got to hear this. Get ready for this one, because this is one of the most egregious, ridiculous, outrageous things in his entire book. A political cost that didn't exist when I dealt with the United Kingdom. Listen to this. In other words, very tough with Israel. The political cost with Israel, very tough. I didn't have the same problem with the United Kingdom, with Germany, with France, Japan, or Canada, or any other close allies. By the way, when was the last time Germany, Canada, France, Japan were threatened for annihilation? When was the last time any of these countries that the president mentions were faced with terrorist acts day in and day out? What chutzpah, what audacity on the part of the President of the United States to talk about these other countries, how easy it is to deal with them, but it is tough to deal with the Prime Minister of Israel. It is tough to deal with the Israelis. The Israelis are facing those who want to destroy the state of Israel. Canada does not have that problem, Mr. President. And the last time I heard, the British don't have that problem. The last time I heard, the Germans don't have that problem. I'm pretty sure the same is true for the Japanese. No one has been threatening any of these countries. So how dare he make this comparison? It is absolutely outrageous. And does the president spend any time talking about the Palestinian culture of terrorism? The Palestinians' own stated aims? You know, the Palestinian people, the Palestinian leadership, if you murder Jews and you end up in jail or you end up dead, guess what? Your family will be paid forever. You're going to get a freaking stipend from the Palestinian government for killing Jews, for murdering Jews. Am I making this up? Is this not true? That the Palestinian government hands out a stipend. You're better off, going out there and killing Jews and ending up in jail or even dying, because your family will receive more money than you will ever make working. It is absolutely unbelievable. Does Barack Obama mention any of this? Did Barack Obama in 8 years ever try to stop this outrage on the part of the Palestinian leadership, paying those who murdered Jews? It's unbelievable. And the refugee problem, something I've heard all of my life, the refugees. The only refugees that were refugees in 1948, they are still refugees in 2020, and they will still be refugees next year, 2 years from now, 5 years. The only refugees that are forever refugees are the Palestinian people. It's unbelievable. It is unbelievable how the leadership of the Palestinian people have misled their own people. And the world pays for these refugees. They're not refugees. They don't live in refugee camps. Almost all of them live in middle-class homes in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. It is unbelievable that the refugees have not been absorbed by the 22 Arab nations. In fact, you're a refugee if you're working in Saudi Arabia and making $500,000 a year. You're a refugee if you're living in any of the other countries of the Middle East doing very, very well. No intention of ever going back to so-called Palestine. It is unbelievable. And does Barack Obama acknowledge any of this? Absolutely not. Here's another one on the part of our former president. He speaks of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as one of the holiest sites of Islam. That's what he says. I appreciate that. Holiest site of Islam. How about the fact that it is also the holiest site of the Jewish people, where for 19 years a Jew could not go to their holiest site and pray between 1948 and 1967. Why does the president ignore this? It has repercussions when you ignore some of the facts, when you're not balanced. What could possibly be his agenda? What could possibly be his motivation to present a distorted view of the facts in the Middle East? American foreign policy should not be balanced. Why should it be balanced? There are good guys and bad guys. There are those who have always wanted to make peace, and there are those who will never make peace, because ultimately the goal of the Palestinian leadership is not to have a Jewish state, period. So there are good guys, and America should be on the side of the good guys. The Trump administration understood that. They got it. They saw the picture very, very clearly. And unfortunately, the Obama view as presented in this work of 750 pages, part 1, unfortunately, this narrow, dishonest, full of incorrect information, unfortunately, is also the worldview representing so many in the Democratic Party. Sadly, a growing segment of the Democratic Party. And the effect of the Obama book is very, very serious. We're talking about a book. Remember, his wife's book was on the bestseller list, I think, for a year. Read by millions and millions of people. And I'm sure the same thing will be true for President Obama's book. This misinformation is dangerous. There are things in this book, many of the things I haven't even mentioned, that are just incorrect historically. And then you have the distortion. And I pray and I hope that President-elect Biden is not going down the same path as Obama. I hope to God that the Biden administration will not be Obama 3, a continuation of the 8 years of the Obama administration. I hope that the Biden administration will recognize that Israel is a democracy, a true democracy. I hope the Biden administration will recognize that Israel is constantly under threat. Israel is under threat. No Arab country needs to fear the state of Israel. The state of Israel is not threatening anyone anywhere in the world. I hope the Biden administration will not rush back into the Iran deal that was flawed from the very, very beginning. I hope they will take a deep breath, and I hope they will deal with the reality of what Iran is, spreading terrorism, havoc throughout the world. Everyone, starting with the Prime Minister of Israel and the people of Israel. Who benefits more by peace than the people of Israel? What other country? Israel, that is under threat, benefits the most. But it needs to be a real peace. America can make a mistake with the Iran deal, and our consequences will be limited. But the same is not true for the people of Israel. If, God forbid, you get it wrong, the people of Israel, God forbid, are faced with a nation in the world that openly says that we will remove the state of Israel from the map of the world. That is the reality. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back with you next week.